Let's bring in Hannah Ryder. She's the Chief Executive Officer at the think tank Development Reimagined. She's joining us on the program at the moment. Hannah, so South Africa's finance minister said, there was general agreement, right, against protectionism and economic fragmentation. But at this point, isn't that exactly where global trade is heading, regardless of the sentiments that have been expressed at this meeting?
Look, the G20, you can see it as the world's equivalent of the Economic and Financial Forum of the UN Security Council. There's a lot to discuss, and for the finance ministers, a great deal too, and definitely not just trade issues. So although, of course, we had some, I guess what some might interpret as positive language on trade in terms of continuing openness, etc., this is not really the forum to be discussing trade. There is a G20 trade ministers meeting where they can discuss this in much more detail and really work through whether the consensus is around here or not. This is not really finance ministers' purview, even though since 2024 last year we've had trade included on these sorts of in these discussions.
Indeed. So assuming this lack of representation from some of these key economies, the Americans, for example, not at the table, neither was India or China or Japan. Assuming that lack of representation at the top level remains a hallmark of G20 meetings this year, including the trade one that you've just alluded to, how should policymakers here be thinking about tackling climate finance and debt reform issues in 2025?
Yeah, I think what the South African government have done so far follows the kinds of actions that Indonesia took, for example, in their presidency, where it was actually quite difficult to build consensus. And we've had other G20 meetings where leaders have not all leaders have attended, not just because of COVID-19, but there were other G20 meetings as well. It's not this only instance. So let's be careful not to say this is what South Africa is going to bring to the table. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot that South Africa can still do. These countries, even if they didn't send their finance minister, they did send other representatives, which was important. And those representatives will go back and will be able to discuss what the next steps are. And I think the more diplomacy from South Africa, diplomacy from also others with a strong interest now in the G20, like the African Union, for making these issues coming to the fore, where there can be consensus built, I think will be very important. And this was South Africa's opportunity to put its priorities out for the first time, and I think it did that, even though it's going to be tough.